There has been much talk about what the Taiwan Policy Act means for the country. Today we'll discuss how this legislation could benefit Taiwan. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, covering the latest global news and analysis from Taiwan perspective. I'm Catherine Liu.
I'm Rath Wang. Joining us in the studio to discuss this today are Lai Yizhong, President of the Prospect Foundation, and Leonard Chow, International Affairs Chair at the Taiwan People's Party, former ambassador to Swaziland, and National Tsinghua University adjunct professor, both of whom are seasoned diplomats. I spoke earlier to both Democratic Progressive Party, DPP, and Kuomintang, KMT mission leads in Washington, D.C. on how the country's two largest parties view the Taiwan Policy Act. During my trip, I also had a chance to speak to visiting DPP legislator Wang as he was on Capitol Hill. And I also heard firsthand from Senator Bob Menendez, the co-sponsor of the Taiwan Policy Act, on why it is so important for both countries. Let's have a look.
Taiwan produces 90+% of all the world's high-end semiconductors and chips. Everything that we use in our life, this phone has a chip in it.
Yes.
The machinery that you use, and maybe in some of your businesses to create things, has chips in it. And so if we were to allow China to overcome Taiwan and control 90+% of all the world's high-end superconductors and semiconductors and chips, we'd be in a world of hurt. Chinese would control us in a way that we cannot accept. Now, we don't see conflict with China. We want peace and stability. We invited China into the international order to participate in the hopes, not that they would become a Jeffersonian democracy, but in the hopes that by participating in the international order, they behave in more of an international atmosphere. Unfortunately, that has not been China's reality. And so we are challenged with the China that we have, not the one we want it to be. And so helping Taiwan is, yes, about helping Taiwan, but it's also in the national interests of the United States, it's in the national security interests of the United States. And so for all those reasons, we're really thrilled that we passed this legislation. It has many other dimensions to it, but it's really about helping Taiwan continue to be able to have its autonomy, to be able to deal, to prosper as it has, to participate in the global community in a way that has been extraordinarily beneficial.
You just heard from U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, the co-sponsor of the Taiwan Policy Act. There appears to be growing support as Washington increasingly sees the importance of Taiwan. My first question goes to you, President. As a longtime observer of U.S.-Taiwan ties, how have you perceived U.S. support for Taiwan in the midst as U.S. is increasingly having this competition with China?
I think, of course, right now the U.S. is in full competition with China, and the relationship has been changed since the year 2016 or 17. And in that regard, the U.S.-Taiwan relation also improved, not because that the U.S. want to use Taiwan against China, but because that the U.S. started to see that Chinese coercion against Taiwan is detrimental to the U.S. national interests, and the U.S. need to support Taiwan. And so that this is how the dynamic that is being going on. And apparently China is not satisfied with these dynamics, and every time when the U.S. voices support or have any measure to support Taiwan, that China not only vent on the United States, but also puts on anger against Taiwan. So we started to see all those kind of the military harassment against Taiwan since the year 2016 September, way before when the United States sent its Navy ship to patrol across the Taiwan Straits.
But has this intensified with them?
Of course it is. Of course it is. But also that the United States is seeing that Taiwan, many of Taiwan's need, and not just about the security, but also Taiwan's isolation from the international community, U.S. set up its support. In the past, basically the United States, especially during the Bush administration and also Obama administration, the support for Taiwan International Organization, that came in the form about the voice support, but not in terms of the more actions. For examples, after year 2016, the U.S. support and the U.S. engagement to sustain Taiwan's diplomatic allies, or to convince another diplomatic ally not to sever ties with Taiwan, has been intensified despite China's very aggressive campaign against them. And also, in terms of international organizations' support for Taiwan, U.S. not only talk about some individual organizations such as WHO and also the ICAO as well as Interpol, but also I think year 2021, U.S. came out in a more systematic way about how Taiwan should be included in the United Nations systems. So that was the first that we have ever seen before. So basically, we're seeing the across the board support for Taiwan. But of course, right now, the U.S. major concern about Taiwan is that the war by China on Taiwan could probably happen in 5 years, before year 2027, when Xi Jinping assumed his third terms. So that many of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship and the engagement has been geared toward help Taiwan to defend itself and how to improve the capability and the capacity for Taiwan to be able to fend Chinese aggression.
Talking about defense in Taiwan, right, Ambassador, the most notable provision in this act is so interesting, is to strengthen the military cooperation from U.S. to Taiwan. And that, I would say, very sensitive toward China. There has been much talk about whether it's Biden's administration's true wish or there's been criticized about this progressive act. What's your take on the real Biden administration stance?
Well, thank you, Catherine. Well, first of all, I would like to, if I may, have a maybe polite correction of two things, if you don't mind. That what you mentioned, Rath mentioned earlier about the two largest political parties in Taiwan. But as a matter of fact, I mean, I know you're referring to, the DPP and KMT. But according to some recent polls, which have shown that the TPP, Taiwan People's Party, has outperformed KMT. Okay, so I'm not arguing about which party is the largest, but maybe it should be updated from time to time.
Many parties.
Okay.
Democratic party.
Okay. And second, polite correction, if I may, that you mentioned, Catherine, about the military cooperation stemming from the Taiwan Relations Act. But the military cooperation, well, some slide,
Taiwan Policy Act. The newest Taiwan Policy Act.
Okay.
Yeah.
Taiwan Policy Act. Okay. Yeah. Because the military cooperation. That's right. That's turned out to be a very eye-catching part of this very act. I would like to say, as Mr. Lai has mentioned, talk about a lot of how the U.S. administration is trying to help Taiwan. I have no doubt that Biden administration is going to follow suit of his predecessors in maintaining and promoting the relationship with Taiwan in any way they can. Okay, I don't want to repeat what you already heard that. But the current, the Taiwan Policy Act as a TPA per se, that as you know that a couple of weeks ago, when this bill was being discussed within the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but the Biden administration, okay, I would like to say that no administration in any part of American history would venture to say no to any legislation in the United States, because there's a two branch system in the U.S. government, check and balance, that. So, but this bill, when it was being discussed within the Senate, Foreign Relations Committee, Jake Sullivan, of the NSC of the White House, Jake Sullivan, he already expressed his concern for a certain clause of this Taiwan Policy Act. And deliberately, Jay Sullivan spoke that, told that in public. And in addition, some of the media, like in the Washington Post, CNN, if my memory serves me right, they also have, revealed similar reservation about this bill. Turned out to be sound like a controversial, whether it's truly serving the interests of U.S. national interest. So that remains uncertain. So we, for sure, that we have heard enough concern, if not opposition, from the U.S. administration about this bill. So I would be doubtful that if you say that Biden administration is pushing for this legislation, it's rather a congressional action. Okay, it's not. So it goes without saying that the Biden administration, in a word, that is not comfortable with this.
It's not comfortable
in the first place.
So concerns in terms of what it is, or I'll let you President talk.
With all due respect to our ambassador, his very bountiful experience in managing the congressional relation for Taiwan in D.C. But I'd just like to remind people here that it is not without precedence that the executive branch voiced their concern or even against the congressional bill. One example concerning Taiwan is exactly that when the Ambassador Zhao was in Washington, D.C., the old famous Taiwan Security Enhancement Act in 1999, that was proposed by a Republican-held Congress to a certain extent that the Clinton administration was adamantly opposed that you should not pass that.
And what happened to that bill?
Of course, that bill, after the markup, and then just end up after the election defeat of the Democrat.
Because then Clinton administration addressed its concern.
Well, the Clinton administration addressed the concern, but it actually, when it passed the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, due to the election process, that it did not really go to the full floor. Just like it's very possible that Taiwan Policy Act could also end up in the same fate. But the issue is that we have the history in the past that the executive branch come out to voice out their concern even against the certain bill proposed by the Congress. And particularly interesting about this one is that in 20 years ago, Taiwan Security Enhancement Act is actually proposed by Republican against the Democrat administration. But this time, it is the Democrat held the majority in both House and the Senate. They come out with a bill in which the administration, to a certain part of the bill, they voice a concern. So this is the key differences. And we should notify that what does that mean for the Democrat itself, the executive branch and the congressional relationship, is it?
I see, but back to the question, Ambassador said Biden is not comfortable with this act in the first place. Would you agree?
I think the Biden administration talk about certain part of the act. They are not comfortable. It is not the whole thing that they are against. So that they pointed out like this bill direct the Secretary of State to do something, and also to make the Taiwan's non-major NATO allies. And also wanted to have a Senate confirmation regarding the director of AIT in Taiwan, which they believe could have a certain kind of sovereignty recognition or implications in which that might endanger the so-called U.S. One China policy. So this is how the administration, to a certain part of the bill, they voiced a lot of concern. But we did not hear much about the opposition in terms of the military assistance and also the counter-influence operation, the economics assistance, as well as in terms of the Taiwan's international participations, the support for it. So I would say that if you look into really deeply about what the administration's attitude, you could see why they are against, why there's a certain part they do not voice anything at all. And that also indicates that the current administration, their attitude, and probably the direction in terms of improving Taiwan-U.S. relationship.
President, you talked about the One China policy and how there are concerns around that. But we've seen recent acts, like say with the U.S. State Department, Ned coming out saying that this longstanding policy, which they haven't really publicly mentioned since Nixon visited China, that Taiwan's status is undetermined, and we've seen Biden come out on 60 Minutes CBS saying that the U.S. would send troops if China had an unprecedented, unprovoked attack. How would you see that in substance, even though in form the U.S. still recognizes this or upholds to this One China policy?
Well, the United States continue to uphold its One China policy, which is very different from the Chinese version of the One China principle, in which the United States only acknowledge Chinese position that Taiwan is a part of China. And also the U.S. will maintain the unofficial relationship with Taiwan. So that when the part of the bill that probably indicates that the United States will treat Taiwan as the diplomatic allies, or the Taiwan status has been more implicated as this is a sovereign nation or something, in which the United States refrained itself from stating whether it is or not. So that I think it is a concern about those part of the bill that the Biden administration is very much is concerned about the possible consequences if the passage and what Chinese reaction toward it. And that's how the so-called One China policy, when the United States stated that and how that it should be remain, and the part of the bill could endanger the so-called maintaining the one China policy and the opposite.
It's interesting that Rath just mentioned the show 60 Minutes from CBS. Blinken also took an interview on CBS and talked about the importance of Taiwan. From the president to the Secretary of State mentioning importance of Taiwan. Would you see U.S. is actually moving away from its strategy ambiguity and moving to a more clear and clarity strategy toward U.S.-China and Taiwan relations?
I'd like to reply to this question, maybe in a maybe a two-fold, three-fold way. First, I'd like to remind our Taiwanese friends, okay, and maybe the friends around the world, that the U.S. leadership, like Biden, President Biden, or Mr. Blinken, or maybe Mr. Sullivan before that, they are concerned about the Taiwan security and stability. I'd like to specify. Don't get them wrong. They are rather concerned specifically about the Taiwan's semiconductor.
Yes.
The business interests to those countries at stake, like now the U.S., some European countries as well. So some of our Taiwanese people, they would like to put some feathers in their caps. Say, hey, look, they all like Taiwan, they all love us. Well, I appreciate. I rather assume that. I hope they will love Taiwan as much as we do ourselves. But we have to be. We have to be practical. We have to be, very realistic. They love Taiwan, all right, but they love more than Taiwan's interest, Taiwan's security around the Taiwan, Strait. More specifically, like semiconductor, TSMC. That's what they're concerned. That's what they have in mind.
Interests.
Yeah. Number one. Number two, that talking about the strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity.
Yeah.
I have heard, we have heard so much about this discussion, which is right, what is what. Well, I would like to, again, humbly, if I may, remind people that that's only one thing for sure, that for the U.S. strategic clarity, what is that? The American national interest, black and white, loud and clear, clarity, no any other, being around. So, for those, talking about this term, it's a strategic ambiguity. It's a rather a term of interpretation. Interpretation for how the U.S. foreign policy is informed and implemented. Okay, so
what direction do you see it going in now?
Okay, let me try to be, because of time constraint, that we haven't heard from any U.S. leader. Always, the U.S. leaders like Biden or Clinton, they never bothered to use that term. The term has been kind of monopolized by some outsiders, privilege to use that term to classify, to define how the Taiwan situation, this and that.
Understood.
Okay, so I think
President, if you could
allow me to finish that. In the word that President Biden and his staff, they will never use that term. They rather sit back and watch the people
so interpret.
Okay, interpretation. Okay, to play around with this term, they rather like to watch. Okay, then let them play around the term and standing there like on lines as onlookers. They never say that. Only what keeps saying that. So let's not follow this kind of very superficial hearsay.
I see.
So, President, we'll let you respond to that as well.
Well,
real quick before we.
I think the nomenclatures is important, or has been very much emphasized in the U.S.-Taiwan-China relationship. So that, like, what is one China policy, what is strategic ambiguity, what is strategic clarity, those has been in the center of discussions. But I think that we need to look at the purposes. And what if the purpose suits, if the nomenclature suits the purpose, it will stay. If not, then it will not be there. For example, about the strategic ambiguity or strategic clarity, basically it is to maintain peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits. And right now, especially after the war in Ukraine, and what I found out is that the ambiguity probably would not be able to deter the authoritarian aggression against a democratic society, especially on Taiwan. So that there's a gradual move, although it still maintains the ambiguity in order to pacify the Chinese concern. but in the content and also in substance, there's a greater clarity. Whether you can call it a tactical clarity or whatever kind of clarity, that is in the process right now. And also in terms of the military cooperations, I think that if you look at from year 2016, 17 especially, and onward, we already witnessed the thousands of the U.S. active military personnel in Taiwan. And whether they are in the training programs, they are in exchange, observing our exercises, or even instruct some of the joint planning. And that has been going everywhere. So this is something that we never witnessed in the past. And of course, many of the story that hasn't really been publicized until, like from the United States, they're willing to publicize, and outside people will start to know. I think many of the things we see just a tip of the iceberg. A lot of the progress actually has been going on right now as we see it.
Moving into the specifics of the Taiwan Policy Act, I spoke earlier to the respective mission leads in Washington of the DPP, Taiwan's ruling party, and the KMT, the opposition party, on what this act means for Taiwan. Let's first hear from Mike Fonte of the DPP.
Mike, there has been much ongoing debate on the Taiwan Policy Act.
Right.
Which parts do you think would be substantially beneficial to Taiwan? I mean, which parts matter to Taiwan the most?
Well, I think the security provisions in there that talk about foreign military financing, right? Certain lists of weapon systems that ought to be available to Taiwan. Other aspects like that are really very important. The thing to know about the Taiwan Policy Act is Congress has its own process for legislation, right? So this act is now passed the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, but it has to pass the whole Senate. And then it has to go to the House. And probably in the process, it's going to get chopped up. Okay, so the security provisions will be part of the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, which has to pass because that's the Defense Act. So they try to jam stuff in there that they want to pass. And I think those security provisions will be there. And then what happens when it goes to the House is another question. And what happens if there are different aspects of any given piece of legislation? They have a conference. And in the conference, they hash out the final version. So the long way to go on the provisions in the Act, but I think they're very important. They're very important, not just as a signal, but also substantively in terms of helping Taiwan build its defense capacity and build a strong deterrence, which is really what the United States wants to see. And then, the whole question of reserve training, all those other questions that are embedded there is very important. And again, the whole idea from the United States perspective is when the Chinese look across the strait and they think about invading or doing something that serious, they'll say, today is not the day because they're too prepared or there's too much, it would be bloody mess to get there.
It'd be great if you could touch a bit on the gray zone activities.
Yeah.
I think there's been kind of a gap between some policy analysts in DC and those in Taiwan about what is appropriate to have, a deterrence to Beijing, an effective deterrence, like you said,
Right.
in terms of making them say today is not the day.
Right. Well, the problem with gray zone activities is people talk about salami slicing. You keep chopping it up and nothing's left. And those actions after Pelosi visit, clearly bracketing Taiwan with missiles, with planes and ships, show the squeeze on Taiwan, right? So that's kind of gray zone activities. Not a war, but pushing hard on the parameters of Taiwan. And so the question is, how do you push back without creating a war? In the past, I think a lot of people thought, do a asymmetric porcupine strategy and you'll be okay. Well, now you have these other issues. Do we need more big destroyers of some kind? Do we need more planes because the planes are being worn out by all the chasing they have to do with planes? So that changes a little bit of the thought pattern, I think, about what's good for Taiwan to buy or the U.S. to offer for sale.
So this bill actually addresses those issues.
It
to
does.
move out from a porcupine strategy.
Yeah, I mean, there are issues in the list of weapons that are going to be made available supposedly because of this foreign military financing. And some of them are a little bit bigger than, or a little bit further beyond porcupine strategy. I mean, part of the problem is everybody talks about asymmetric defense, but asymmetric is one of those elastic terms, right? What exactly does it mean? How does it get employed in a given space? So Yeah, it's an important and interesting debate. I think it's important for Taiwan to understand that the United States definitely stands firm on its commitment to making sure the Chinese don't in any unprovoked way attack Taiwan.
That was Mike Fonte of the DPP mission in Washington on the Taiwan Policy Act. Let's now turn to Eric Wang of the KMT.
Eric, what is the most beneficial part of the Taiwan Policy Act you see substantially for Taiwan?
Well, first, I think symbolically, this is great for Washington lawmakers and policymakers to think about Taiwan, to have Taiwan in their discussion. I think this is more helpful than people give credit to. I think, for example, Speaker Pelosi's visit to Taiwan really helped the narrative on Taiwan in the best way possible. So this, obviously, that trip, when people have criticism that this might not substantially help U.S.-Taiwan relations, however, that trip actually translate now into some elements of Taiwan Policy Act. I think most important, there are many important factors. So now we're looking at Title II and Title VIII. Title II is defense related. I think this is very important for U.S.-Taiwan, for Taiwan to show our deterrence ability and to show that our people have the willingness to defend ourselves. And then through this, our U.S. lawmakers are willing to provide some assistance. Title VIII, as we see, drawing lessons from Ukraine, economic sanctions do work. And economic sanctions actually is working for Ukraine. So Title VIII is economic sanctions in the event of anybody attacking Taiwan, not only to a state level, but also to a personal level. So I think this really helps Taiwan bolster our defense capability. And this also not only starts discussion in the US, but also in Taiwan. I think Taiwan is already doing a pretty good job at having the willingness, but I think you would do us a great service if people can increase more awareness.
In terms of the awareness aspect, I understand it's important, but as you mentioned, economic sanctions, do you see the US or other allied countries probably doing this on China before an attack, or you would see it as more of something after the attack? Because they've been saying about how Ukraine, the sanctions came a bit late, even though effective, but to be more effective, it'd be better to do it prior to an attack.
Right, well, this question is very complicated. First of all, I think the U.S.-China competition in terms of trade or in the tech industry already exists, right? However, I think both countries still need one another at this point. So I wouldn't delve into what's the best policy for the United States, but I think I can speak for Taiwan that again, drawing lessons from Ukraine, their determination to defend their country is the key right now, right, on top of the foreign assistance. But without that, so the foreign assistance is necessary but not sufficient. The sufficient condition is the determination. So Taiwan has to be fully determined to defend ourselves. I think that's what's most important.
As you can see, both the DPP and the KMT agree that the provision in the Act will bolster Taiwan's defense capabilities. It will provide both fundings and more flexibilities on the articles that Taiwan can procure from the U.S., removing restrictions limited to defense weapons in the Taiwan Relations Act. Many believe that this act better fit the times with an increasingly aggressive China.
Ambassador, we wanted to ask you about the defense articles that Catherine just mentioned. If passed into law, will this be sufficient to Taiwan and its defense and in deterring a Chinese invasion? As the president mentioned that there could be a possible attack in 2027.
Yeah, there's a timeline there.
Okay. Well, I'd like to reiterate that still, seriously speaking, the Taiwan Policy Act has been brought up and introduced. I think it is a rather meaningful time. Once again, that Taiwan has brought up in the spotlight of the global attention that we deserve to be to be concerned about, and we deserve to be pay attention to by the rest of the world. That after all, the Chinese aggression and Chinese attitude against Taiwan is absolutely unacceptable and unreasonable, and then we deserve to be helped, if not to be sympathized by the rest of the world. But we appreciate some real concrete action, concrete help from the rest of the world, rather than some of the words of lip service or some superficial words like some recently some the global leaders such as the new the Britain UK Prime Minister
Liz Truss.
That's right, yeah, Liz Truss. So we appreciate that, but we can hardly rely those lip service, those wording support for our well-being, for our national interest. So we have to look after that on our own, based on our sovereign, deliberation and judgment of wisdom. So then talking about this, 2027, the schedule. I don't know how to comment on that, but I found that rather, it's very interesting, if not funny, that should we continue, jump into the foreigners, okay, let me quote, foreigners, some of the ex-officials, some of the so-called international observers from the US, from Europe, that should we follow suit their oversimplify, miscalculation, or calculation, or prediction about a certain Chinese invasion schedule, a certain time, a certain day, certain year, they're going to do something militarily against Taiwan. Well, do you think the PRC or PLA will follow their crystal ball? They follow what did they say? We all know that very well. Most of the wars, if not all of the wars in human history, they all broke out unexpectedly, not being expected.
Miscalculations.
That's right, the miscalculation. Let me finish that. So, and about the passage of this act. Well, we still respect, based on my previous experience working in Washington D.C. dealing with the Capitol Hill, it would be less likely that this bill would get passed into law, and let alone that this is the timing. Okay, is rather very unique when the current efforts being made by both the United States and China about the possible Biden and Xi summit meeting in the near future. Okay, so will the U.S. administration will push for this bill at this time to shoot his foot on this moment? So I think in the world that as a turnout, I will not be surprised that this Taiwan Policy Act will bark more than bite.
I think we're talking about the defense articles that the U.S. sees as vital to Taiwan's defense. And President, if you could talk a bit about the urgency and also why 2027, as you've seen, the executive branch has also come out to support these certain articles.
Of course, year 2027, that timeline came out last year on February when the Senate had a hearing, and we see both the former and the current Indo-PACOM commander, they come out and say that this is the year that we should be very much careful about. And they're not saying that it's going to be in year 2027, but within like 6 years. And last year, they did 6 years. Right now, it will be 5 years. And the year 2027 happened to be a political calendar of China. First of all, that will be near the end of the Xi Jinping third term. And also, that's the 100 years anniversary of the PLA establishment. And so the issue about the Xi Jinping and the political calendar associated with it is that for Xi, he has the letting down the economic performances or the social problem and other problem that's been so huge. And for Xi Jinping, that he continue to assert that he's a rightful place for the leader of China. He needs something big, and Taiwan apparently seems to be the price that he wanted to have in order to legitimize his third term. So basically, this is a political judgment rather than the military has to be. But a lot of people expected that this judgment is sound, especially Biden administration earlier. Last year, they did not subscribe to this theory, but this year, after the war in Ukraine, they start. You see the director of the national intelligence, and as well as the Secretary of Defense, they both came out with the schedule, year 2027 to year 2030. Those are the very concerned time that for the United States. Now, going back to the content, especially the military part of this bill, I think when people mostly talk about FMF, originally it talks about like the 4.5 billion in terms of the grant and also 2 billion in terms of the loan, but now it has been readjusted into the 6.5 billion in grant.
Yeah.
So there's no longer loan, and also the.
It's so interesting. Why, and do you think it's sufficient to provide this comprehensive military training for Taiwan?
Well, those are different parts. First of all, about 6.5 billion in terms of the grant.
Yeah.
That basically is for defense articles. And there also has other specified mention regarding the training program and also the issues such as the military planning mechanisms. It is stated that directs the Secretary of Defense to establish a high-level military planning mechanism with Taiwan. Blah, blah, blah. And even set a model with the joint U.S. military advisory group in Thailand, so that they try to get some of the available model that the United States has with other countries, and to see that can work with Taiwan. So there are already some thinking process about how this could move forward. Of course, right now in Taiwan, a lot of discussion has been on the 6.5 billion and for the defense article. But I think we should also notice that there are other parts of the discussion in the bill about the training program itself, and also about the redefinition. What does that mean to be the asymmetric, which has not been appeared at the proposed U.S. bill regarding Taiwan. Now, going back to the 6.5 billion on the grant, I think it's important that right now the U.S.-Taiwan discussion in terms of defense of Taiwan, we are facing the issue about the limited resources. And Taiwan needs to improve its asymmetric defense capability in face of the possible invasion, the amphibious invasion by China. But at the same time, that especially after the August exercise by China on Taiwan, we noticed that the blockade placed by China on Taiwan, that could also be another scenario that we need to deal with. And the blockade itself, although it's already been mentioned in the Taiwan Relations Act, this is something that U.S. Need to respond. But we do not have the kind of the capability as well as the capacity and also the U.S.-Taiwan joint training to face these situations. So that with the Taiwan limited resources and through the arms sale, we just cannot cover both ends. For the asymmetric defense need as well as some of the more capability that require traditional platform. So that with this 6.5 billion of the grant in 5 years, I think it could address, I'm not going to say solve, but it could address somewhat about what the capability that we need. So that you could say that Taiwan suddenly we have in 5 years, 6.5 billion US dollars in terms of how to purchase or to improve our capabilities. And we could use that extra resources to help us to streamline as well as to broaden and expand some of the area that we weren't able to cover if earlier we just only with Taiwan's own money.
Yeah, but I think the most important question here is that sufficient or enough to deter China's invasion?
I do not think that in the military terms that you are going to say that it's definite to deter. Deter is also another thing about how to prevent or dissuade China from attacking Taiwan. But the issue right now in Taiwan is about when China decided to invade Taiwan, are we able to have the capability to really defend on our own? And this is the question right now that's been under discussions. Rather than how to deter. Deter also means that you want to have other capabilities, such as the weapon of mass destruction. And does Taiwan need that? Or would the United States provide Taiwan with that? That would be a whole different level of discussion. But I think right now is the help Taiwan to defend itself, the capability to be able to fend against the threat, whether that's the invasion through amphibious landing, or the other kind of the so-called gray zone operation by China on Taiwan. Those are the things that definitely needed, especially in the next 5 years.
Speaking of these different tactics, and this question's for you, Ambassador.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion saying that this bill actually allows the U.S. to dictate what kind of articles or what strategy Taiwan will be able to use with the $6.5 billion. And do you see this as a detriment to Taiwan's defense strategy, or do you feel that that enhances Taiwan's defense?
Well, it's not an easy, question to answer at this point of time. But as a matter of fact, if we can, talk about this issue from another, more practical, working, perspective, that recently I've spoken with a number of, military, community friends. There are some two-star general, and from the, retired military, personnel. We talk about this bill, and they remind me kindly that this 6.5 billion grant, whatever. But they say the figure itself looks very tempting, but you have
but it is modest compared to, say, Ukraine and
Ukraine. That's right. Yeah. Okay. But that's another issue. That's another issue. Ukraine and Taiwan are different, two different countries and with different situation. But because this high number, this high figure, kind of looks larger than some of the numbers we have seen in the past. Looks very tempting. But they remind me that you have to look into how they're going to be executed in details. Now the wording is there, but it had remained to be seen how it's going to be implemented. So say it's a detrimental or beneficial. It's a matter of how it's going to happen, what's going to happen. And some of the military friends told me that they would rather be very pessimistic. They would not they take a dim view to this because they will let them intervene some of the military operation within our government. So talk about a training program. They will not be happy to see that happen. And so look at the two possible repercussions from this bill, this clause. If it's going to military defense, well, let alone that asymmetric defense, asymmetric warfare. Well, it's a creation from the Americans, not from our defense people. So defense people in our country, they never say that. They say if you talk about asymmetric, that is unequal. Then it's not going to make Taiwan look good in this kind of the level. So we should avoid to be involved in this kind of asymmetric. I think the peace is rather more important than war. No matter how well you're preparing for the war, you're not going to be able to.
So speaking of peace, how do we get there?
So the peace, that's another issue. Given the time constraint, I'm not going any further. But let's look at two possible results. First, if this bill, this military grant bill, is as sensitive as it looks like, has been discussed, then how the Beijing's reaction so far? We haven't been able to see some spicy reaction from Beijing, from Zhongnanhai so far. They knew what's going to happen. Maybe like whatever it happened before. Taiwan Policy Act. I would hate to use the word. But it's rather might be another congressional show. Like what happened in the past, Taiwan Travel Act, Taiwan Assurance Act, Taipei Act. Look,
So they did pass.
They did pass, but it's a sense of the Congress. You know that very well. It's no binding force for your administration. It's a pie. It looks delicious, but not going to be able to have a bite of that. Okay, so now the first reaction from China, no, not some very strong or powerful reaction. And secondly,
they did issue some typical.
yeah, but it's an announcement. Okay, announcement that it's wording. Okay, but second reaction, after this, this TPA has been announced, passed, but our military, our defense ministry, never say any word in response to this, this bill. As opposed to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOFA, they have expressed some welcome, friendly, welcome. But the Defense Ministry, so far, I believe that there's still some under-table negotiation or consideration, deliberation with our, defense, administration. So let's not jump into kind of some real, discussion, because let's wait and see. I'm sure that I'd rather leave it up to our defense and some military committee people to think about it. Yep, okay.
I spoke earlier to legislator Wang as he met with U.S. lawmakers on Capitol Hill on which parts are likely to pass and substantial benefits Taiwan. Let's take a look.
What do you believe would be the most influential or substantially influential piece of the legislation for Taiwan?
This act actually is too important to Taiwan. First, it gives the concrete help, military, foreign military financing is very helpful, and it's a symbol to recognize Taiwan is a country and is an ally, important ally of the United States. And however, there are 9 titles in this act. Each title has its importance. Some is a national symbolic meaning. Some is trade, bilateral trade, engagement, something like that. However, according to the legislative process in the United States, maybe there won't be enough time to accomplish this lawmaking process. So we are trying very hard with MOFA from Taiwan, try to communicate with our friends in the United States. Maybe can use some attachment to attach some important titles with NDAA. Then we can make some titles pass in the end of this year. That will be something great achievement. Especially, I personally think it's the most significant law since Taiwan Relations Act. So we need to work hard, and we appreciate our counterpart in DC, and we hope we can work out and make this act, some of these titles at least can be passed.
So the most important part, you believe, is the military aspect.
I think these 9 titles, they all are important. But if you ask me, I need to make some priority. Maybe Title 2 and Title 1 will play the most important role in this act. Title 1 is about our diplomatic status, and the Title 2 is about security. So Taiwan security is the most getting the most supporting from our allies, especially according to my observation, there are consensus about Title 2. So if we can, through attachment, hook up Title 1 and Title 2 is NDAA, maybe that will be a good approach to complete this legislative process.
As you've heard from Wang Jingyu, there has been much speculation on the final form of the act. Let's talk about economic sanctions. Ambassador, just talk about business interests. President, this question goes to you. In this act, Title 8, it's all about economic sanctions that might deter China's invasion. Do you agree that such economic implements can actually slow down the hostile
or even
style from China?
The sanction part is not about deterring China from attacking Taiwan.
It's about trade?
No, it's about the punishment, about the certain decision makers, about the behavior. They need to bear the consequences.
Did you say punishment?
Yeah, it's punishment. You don't deter a certain country's actions by going after those countries' certain leadership.
But it's a
and
signal.
hoping that
hoping.
they could, because of the fear of the sanction, and they would think twice about making such decision. Decision making itself is a very complicated process. You just cannot expect that you could harass or sanction some people and then hope that you can get the result you want. So basically, this is part of the punishment, and especially when China started to have sanction on Taiwan leadership. We do know that our foreign minister, our Speaker of the House, and also the Premier, and as well as others, they started to be placed upon a Chinese sanction list. So this bill, to a certain extent, is the show of the solidarity that they are doing things on Taiwan and we're going to do things on China. Although we do not know whether how effective it's going to be, because like the United States also passed other similar sanction action against the violation of Xinjiang human rights and also the Hong Kong. But the Chinese continue those actions nonetheless. So basically, I think we do see this as action of solidarity and also try to punish those people who are responsible for making the decisions about the consequence they should bear.
Would you say it's an extended part of China-U.S. trade war?
No, this is not about trade war. This is about the actions. The action bear the consequences. And also, I think that when we talk about the possible passage or not passage about this bill, it's important to know that the bill is not proposed or even driven by the administration. It is proposed and driven by the Congress. So that we have to look at the possible trajectory through the congressional point of view. And basically, right now, this year, we have the Congress have the midterm elections. All House members and 1/3 of the Senate member, they will be in the election. And not to mention about some of them will be in the state government elections. So that with that in mind, and that's going to be in November, we do not have a lot of time in passing, not just about the Senate floor, especially on the House floor, in order to make it into the law. So it's basically impossible for this legislation to be able to pass in the Senate and the House. So that is basically a congressional schedule. But it is important to know that some of the things that have been mentioned in these legislations, for example, in terms of the military assistance, that could make itself into the NDAA as a provisions. But how much of the provision will be able to have the effect, that still remains to be seen. Another thing is that the other parts of the bill regarding the Taiwan international participations, economic cooperation, counter-influence operations, although that probably would not be able to be passed as a whole in this bill, but the issue has been mentioned by the Congress. I believe it could have the effect that in the next sessions, next year, the other parts of the different bill could come out. For example, when we talk about the asymmetric capability discussions, we do have the Senate Judge Hawley, his proposition about the Taiwan Deterrence Act, in which he talks about that the U.S. assistance to Taiwan would depend upon how Taiwan purchase the kind of asymmetric capabilities in internal defense. So that he paired that the U.S. assistance to Taiwan with only a certain part of Taiwan's military purchasing, and which basically add up to the pressure that you have to go to the asymmetric. Otherwise, I'm not going to give you it at all. But this time, apparently, they has been taken out in this bill. And also, this bill also specifically mentioned about you need to define among the United States, what do you mean by asymmetric capability? What do you mean by asymmetric defense? Because it is not such a well-defined word, even in the United States. There is all the confusion. So that this bill, this part basically reflects a kind of the evolutions of the U.S.-Taiwan discussions, and that process also reveals that it is not a dictate from one country to another. It's a dialogue. It's a conversation between two countries.
So you feel this is a reaction because of China's belligerence or its increased aggression towards Taiwan?
It's both, and also I think some press report also noted that it's a reaction from the Congress about the frustration regarding the administration's policy in supporting Taiwan. So, but that is a
would
different.
That change, you think, if there's a majority in Congress by the Republicans, say come December, and with the new session and all?
I do not know whether that if the Republican captured the majority and the House or the Senate could become the battlefield between the Republican and the Democrats, so that it's no longer a administration versus executive branch versus the Congress, and that dynamic will be very different. So it remains to be seen.
Ambassador, what are your views on this?
Well, okay, I'd like to ask a question from another perspective,
yes.
Given time constraint. That I think we might as well, maybe take the initiatives instead of waiting, here, idolize, waiting for the U.S., senators or House of Representatives to work on the bill. Okay, some of them need to be amended, some are enriched. I hope maybe our TECRO friends in Taiwan, in Washington D.C., they have already done that. They're doing what? To take initiative to suggest, to approach the Capitol Hill friends to say maybe to insert some of the real beneficial or real good provisions or clause serving Taiwan's best interest, Taiwan's better interest, instead of antagonizing any Chinese possible aggression or belligerent attitude to Taiwan. We serve our best interest. Look what you mentioned about the economic sanction.
Yes.
I think that I heard that the original version does include some of the sanction version to certain officials in Beijing, okay, decision makers. But it turned out that has been toned down. The revised version did not cover that part. Okay. Then secondly, that take Taiwan in this bill like a non-ally, and grants. I met Gentleman Landis when he was a congressman in Washington, many years ago. Okay, he's a nice man. But why don't we just discuss with them? Okay, look, that's why we're concerned about the BPA.
So you think the most important aspect?
I think that
the business part.
Business
right?
part in terms
It's the
of
business interest.
That's right. That serves our interest, and without any antagonizing anyone. I think the Beijing we're not in the position to say any words about that. We care about
the middle
our
ground
people.
here.
I think that's more important. People are telling okay, let's wait for the Congress, the discussion result. Let's see the result. No, let's take initiative to suggest that, hey, look, we'd like to do something to be seen in this, revised version in the future. I think that will serve our better interest than this original.
President, do you agree?
Well, I have to say that if you look at the content of the Taiwan Policy Act, especially in Section of Title 5, it specifically talks about the economic part. Basically, what it said is that the enhanced development and economic cooperation between the United States and Taiwan, in which it talks about the U.S.-Taiwan Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue, which already started in 2020, and also the sense of Congress about the free trade agreement with Taiwan, about that's something that we need to pursue. And especially coming from a traditional anti-FTA Democrat control Senate and House. And so this bill itself, proposed by the Democrats, is a testament about how the support for Taiwan is good bipartisan in terms of FTA. Of course, the outside criticism can also always go to like, why don't you talk about the IPEF? Why don't you talk about the U.S.-Taiwan 21st century, the